This is concept question 2.9 from chapter 4. It says that during World War II, many goods such as butter, sugar, and gasoline were rationed or price controls were imposed. The graph on the right shows the market for gasoline. Suppose that the government decides to set a price ceiling of $2 on gasoline. This price is shown on the graph. And it wants us to use the drawing tool to show the implicit supply curve given the price ceiling, and then also use the point tool to identify the implicit price and quantity. So first of all, I'm going to flip over here to where I have a little whiteboard to work on, and let's talk about price ceilings and what they do in the market. So grab a pen here and just sketch a little supply and demand graph here. So we've got supply, we've got demand. And a price ceiling essentially says, rather than letting the price and quantity demanded come to the equilibrium, which would be here, right, in the middle of where the supply and demand curves cross, now we're going to say a price can only be this high. So this is my price ceiling price. I'm going to label it PC. So it's price ceiling. Remember, this is my price and this is my quantity demanded down here. Quantity demanded or quantity supplied. So what happens when the price is set low like that is that suppliers, remember, they get to decide how much they're going to make of something, and the demanders sort of just have to deal with it. So when price is set lower like that, the suppliers decide, okay, well, based on my supply curve, based on my law of supply, at that price, this is how much I want to produce, right? See that? Because that's where this price line crosses the supply curve. It's at this point. So the suppliers are going to decide based on their supply line how much they want to produce, and they'll produce this much. So this quantity, we'll say quantity C. So that's the quantity with the ceiling is what that C stands for. So now the demanders just have to deal with that quantity, right? So how are the demanders going to respond to that price and that quantity? They'd respond based on the demand curve, right? Because that's how the demand curve tells us is how demanders, consumers, are going to behave. So at this quantity, the demand curve is up here at this point. So that essentially tells us, the demand curve essentially tells us how much the consumers are willing to pay for the product, for gasoline in this case, when this quantity is all that is supplied. So you can think about this in very real-world examples of when we have gasoline shortages and people line up at the pump, and people are willing to pay higher prices for gasoline because there's less of it in the market. And that is the law of demand. That's the demand curve. So because there's only QC, there's only this much gasoline in the market, demanders are willing to pay this price way up here, right? Which is significantly higher not only than the price ceiling price, but also than the equilibrium price, which would just be right here, right? So this is my price equilibrium, which is higher than the ceiling, but lower than the amount the demanders are willing to pay, the consumers are willing to pay under the price ceiling. But they're only required to pay the amount of the price ceiling, right? That's the point of the price ceiling, that is how much gasoline costs right now. So what happens here is we tend to get black markets because there's a shortage of the product, gasoline in this case, and people are willing to pay so much more, way more up here than the price ceiling, we get situations where people will maybe hand the guy a couple extra bucks under the table to be able to get some of the gasoline, right? So we have sort of a black market that occurs because of the price ceiling. And so that phenomenon is represented by this line here that I've drawn, the vertical red line. And that line we call the implicit price curve, because this is the implicit, or the implicit supply curve, sorry, because this is implicitly how much is going to be supplied and how much people are willing to pay at that quantity. So it's sort of, you can think of implicit supply sort of the same thing as like a black market kind of supply. So what they're asking us to do, let's flip back over to the question, is label that implicit supply curve and the implicit pricing quantity. So now that we've got the this price ceiling at $2, what's the quantity that's going to be supplied, and what is the implicit price that people are going to be willing to pay? Not the actual price, the ceilinged price, but what is sort of this black market implicit price. So that's what they're asking us to do, is just label that for this particular market. So I'll click the little magnifying glass to make it bigger and easier to draw on. And we're going to grab the line tool and bring it just right down here. So with a price ceiling of $2, the suppliers are going to decide how much they're going to supply. And they're going to supply this amount, right? The amount where the price ceiling crosses the supply curve. So I'll just take my line tool and click here to start this line and draw it straight up vertically until it hits the demand curve. And I'll draw it on a little bit higher too so we can just see the full effect. Because where it hits the demand curve, that's going to give us the implicit price, the black market price that people are willing to pay when this is the quantity that is supplied. So I'll long press to make it stop, make my line stop. There we go. And we'll label this line my implicit supply line. Okay, does that make sense? I'm going to click this and drag it. Can I click it? Oh, maybe not. Maybe it just has to stay there. So just this line right here just shows us the implicit supply. So how much is being, what is the quantity supplied on up to the demand curve, just so we can see the next thing it wants us to label, which is the implicit price. So how much are people actually going to be willing to pay? It's going to be on this dot right here, where that implicit supply curve crosses the demand curve. I'll slide it over slightly so that it's just right. So this is the struggle that we all go through with this graphing tool, I know. Trying to get it to line up just right. Whoops. Okay, still struggling. But anyway, you get the point. Here we go. I think it's on the line now. And I'm going to label it the implicit price. So that's all they're asking you to do here, is show that line, that implicit supply line of what is the quantity that's actually supplied at that price ceiling, and then based on that, what is the price that the consumer is going to be willing to pay by bringing that implicit supply line on up to where it hits the demand line. Click save, and that's it. So if you have more questions, let me know. I'll be happy to talk this over with you at office hours. Thanks.